checked with us from the onset and just registered that she is going to be the MC. And I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Sheila.
Yeah. Excellent.
I thank Avery and Attorney Bourne. I call her Attorney Bourne because she'll get annoyed when I do that. She wants to become Judith. And Avery acknowledged that he didn't come here as a representative of any of those unions, but I just wanted you all to know for the record that the Steelworkers Union selected me as one of the two candidates in the St. Thomas St. John district that they would support financially. And they only selected 2 in St. Croix and 2 in St. Thomas. So Avery is in good company coming here with his representation, and I really, really appreciate the fact that he comes to me and I can call him, because sometimes, people say they support you, and then they're upset with something that you have done, and then they don't talk to you anymore. They don't talk to you. They don't tell you why. They don't bring their concerns or their issues to you, and you don't even know what happened. So that dialogue that he and I have had is so vital. And I so appreciate the characterization of the political system that Attorney Bourne provided, because it's real. It's real, it's challenging. And sometimes you're just kind of sitting there kind of like, wow, why am I not able to get somebody to understand what this is going to mean? And somewhere along the line somebody says, oh, that's what you meant. And I'm not saying that I know it all. You all know that that's not what I'm saying. Because I practice what I preach, and the preaching that I preach is that there is wisdom in every person. The person who cuts your grass, the person who cleans your bathroom, the person who teaches you, the person who administers a school, there is wisdom in every person. And I try to take advantage of that. So I'm not trying to act like I know everything. But because of my training, which really makes me move in awareness of competing interests and competing opinions, one, I don't ever get upset because somebody has a different point of view than I do, because I never really expect people to agree with me. I always think I'm going to have to convince them of what I believe, right? So I thank you for that. I thank you, Aben. I think after my mother, Aben is the person in this room I've known the longest. So we go back to junior high school. Junior high school, Wayne Aspinall Junior High School. And Aben and I have a mutual admiration society, because I just think he's one of the most beautiful people that I know. Inside, all. And of course, he's there with him. I know a little bit after I know him, right? Now, what you could say about Lorna? What can you say about Lorna? Lorna has sung for us in every campaign, right? And the way how I feel about Lorna's voice, I can't really put it into words all the time. I would just tell you that one time I was at a program, and she used to know this before, at the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Shiloh Church by the fire station in Tutu. And Lorna sang. And I didn't even know that I was standing. It just kind of almost levitated. I didn't know I was even standing. I was blocking out people behind me. I didn't even know. And they didn't care either. And tears were coming out my eyes. Wow. It was so beautiful. So I can't thank you enough for coming and sharing with us as you have each time. It is truly, truly appreciated. Thank you so much. Now, Judy mentioned 2 professions, or 2 vocations, right? And I'm going to add one to it, because this one I'm going to add to is not work. But it speaks to what I believe is the vocation of my spirit, and that is poetry, right? I finally was able to accept that when I did my first book. Because I was like, oh, I have a product, I could call myself a poet now, I have a book. I'm not just a writer of poetry, I have a book, I'm a poet, right? And the reason why I think that's so important and why I want to include is because I believe that the ability to phrase and frame and move people by what you write is God-given. It's a gift from God. So one, you have to treasure it. Two, you have to nurture it. Three, you have to share it. And I believe that when you are not true to it, when people cannot believe the words that come from you, you've lost it. So that's always my endeavor, that what I say reflects what I do and reflects who I am. When that differs, when that starts to change, poetry goes, that God-given gift goes, and I am no longer who I aspire to be. So that's very, very, very important to me. That's behind every way that I express myself and everything I do. People have to be able to believe that the words that come from my mouth speak to what my intentions are, speak to who I am. If I can't keep that, the gift goes. And I do not want that to happen. So, I wanted to share with you that even though I have all of this going on, I still find time, I make time to write and to keep nurturing this gift. And I want to share something with you this morning. It comes out of fire, if you believe that. Fire. Fire factors so much into my life. Because when I was a child, living in St. Kitts, I think I was about 4. And my mother and my father had already come to St. Thomas. So my father left in 1962, and my mother left in 1964. So I was either 3 or 4 when this happened. I believe I was 4. And we lived close to a cane field in St. Kitts. And when the cane is cut, they burn the trash. What remains, they burn the trash, and the field is reinvigorated because the ashes and the whatever the remains are, they nurture new growth. And sometimes you could hear the fire crackling, right? So one day I was home and I was sleeping. I'm living with my grandmother, and I was sleeping in the day, and I woke to hear a crackling sound. And I thought, in my frenzy, in my, that state of when you wake, I thought the house was on fire, right? That was my first thought. I wasn't smelling any smoke, I wasn't seeing any smoke, but I heard this sound of fire. And so I jumped up out of the bed so I could get out of the house, right? And I crumpled to the ground. I just crumpled to the ground. And I tried to get up and I couldn't stand. I was like, what's happening? I can't move, right? But I'm not a stupid child, so I said, I gotta get out anyway. So I creep, I pull myself, by my hands, and I ended up outside on the porch, and I realized there was no fire. So I just sit there and I wait. My grandmother comes up the street, and I said, Mom, I can't walk. She said, how do you mean you can't walk? And she tries to get me to stand, and I can't stand. And they took me to a series of doctors, and eventually they diagnosed that I had some abscess in my side or something like that. And eventually, after months, I regained walking. But what happened during the time that I couldn't walk is that I had a cousin who was about 10 years older than I was, and he used to carry me on his back. He literally carried me on his back. He carried me to the doctor. He carried me to other places that I needed to go. He carried me on his back. And when I came to St. Thomas, so much longer, like say when I was 12 or 13, this thing, of course, this is not something that goes away from me. And so I wanted to write, and this is where fire comes in, where factors in. I wanted to be able to write in a way that I could convey gratitude. Because I was so grateful. When I remembered him, I was so grateful because when you say thank you to somebody, it's really because they have done something that they didn't have to do. He could have dropped me off his back, you know. He did what he felt he had to do. So fire factored into that. And when I was working as a newspaper person, they called me to Moravian School to help the students in the 6th grade start a school newspaper. And I went and I worked with this wonderful group of children. And they wrote stories, and one little girl wrote about how she loved to play softball and all of this good stuff, right? And then shortly after that, the little girl died in a fire in Tutu. The house caught a fire, and she died. And I had this newspaper of this article she had written about how she loved playing softball. And it made me again commit myself to the idea and the recognition that the written word will survive. That her words had survived through the fire, right? And then when you think about the history of these islands and the history of the labor movement, and you think of the queens of the fire burn, and how fire brings about political and social change, right? All of this operating about fire, and I wanted to write something about fire. So this is what I wrote. It's called Things About Fire. There is fire in the summerlands, and there is fire in the ice. There is fire in the morning time and fire in the dying. There is fire in the desert sands and fire in the water. Fire burns and fire freezes. Fire clears the fruited plains. Fire rests and fire surges. Fire whispers, just like rain. There are lessons in the fire. How it stirs up the bottom belly, how it purifies the cane, how it urges men to dreaming, how it breaks the ankle chains, how it beats the heart to action, how the loins it moves to haste, how it mends the broken spirit, how it calls the troops to arms. Fire is at once the healer and the keeper of the rage. Fire tends the brokenhearted. Fire speaks the fool and sage. Fire makes the men believers in the new, the coming age. Fire builds the warrior women. Fire raises queens of state. Fire is the fount of courage. Fire marks the freedom trail. Fire promises renewal. Fire hopes and fire saves. That's fire. Thank you. Now, the fire burn, the queens of steel, made me think about courage, and courage in this process in which I am engaged, right? So I wanted to tell you just a little, because we're not just here to feel good, right? Although we do, we're here to share. So the most recent issue that came before the legislature was a question of borrowing money, of issuing bonds to the tune of about $247 million. Now, it's been before us twice. And the first time it was before us, I voted for it, right? I voted for it because although I usually don't work to support borrowing for capital usage, for operating capital, working capital, excuse me, I voted for it because I convinced my colleagues to add $100 million to it. It was 147, to add $100 million to it to support our retirement system, because I believed that that was a critical thing to do at that time. The bill that went up to the governor, however, omitted, and I think this is by providence, omitted a provision that the bondholders, the bond council were advocating for, which was a provision that includes something that's called a statutory lien. Now, the bondholders already have a contractual lien, sometimes it's called a mechanics lien, in the gross receipts, taxes that we collect from businesses like this, and then with the internal revenue matching funds that are generated by every gallon of rum produced in the Virgin Islands and sold on the mainland, and that's rebated to us. And the system that we have is that the bondholders are paid from that revenue first. They are paid first. Regardless of whatever needs we have in this territory, they are paid first, right? In addition to that, they wanted us to adopt this statutory lien, which says, if we were ever to find ourselves in the same situation as Puerto Rico, and we were to go bankrupt, that lien would still survive because it's now in statute and it would not be discharged in bankruptcy. That language was omitted from the first bill, and I was kind of happy that it was. It really was an oversight, but I was happy, and I wasn't going to point that out to nobody, right? The governor realized that it was missing. So he sent it back and he put in the statutory lien language. So why we were considering it this last day is because it now was a different bill, because it had in a component that the previous one did not. Now, it's important to understand that these people, bond counsel, bond market, they just want to make money. It's no question. I don't have a problem with people making money either. But in the interest of preserving their interests, the statutory lien, they were refunding bonds previously issued. So the statutory lien went back to those previous bonds, retroactive. And the statutory lien, they said they wanted to go forward prospectively to every bond issuance that will follow.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So, me sitting there, having advocated for the $100 million for the retirees and having gotten the people to agree and having it included in the borrowing, now I have to think about, oh my God, can I really support this kind of chokehold on the Virgin Islands, right? And why it was so critical is that this very same week, I had been to forums with children, young people across this island. Eudora Kent, Charlotte Amalia High School, Gomez School, All Saints School. And one of the student questions that they posed at the Charlotte Amalia High School was, what can you do to the panel? What can you do to improve GRS, to save GRS without burdening future generations? That was the question the child asked. So all of us who felt good that we had put in $100 million for bonding, man, you know, bonding is, these bonds are going for about 30 years. So a child who is 12 today is going to be 42. Or 16 is going to be 46, right? When these bonds have been paid. So I had to sit there and really think about, should we try to get this statutory lien only applied to this bond issuance and not all the future ones? And the questions I posed was, suppose the financial condition of the territory improves? Suppose our bond rating improves? Why do we have to be saddled? It's the same kind of question if you want to break it down. If you have bad credit, you might have to get a cosigner, or you might have to do some other thing that the lending institution wants. But when your credit is restored, you don't need no cosigner. You don't need some of the other protections that they wanted you to enter into. So what happens then, and nobody wanted to commit to, well then that condition will be removed. And so I said to myself, no, I can't vote for this. I cannot vote for this. And Senator Mellon Young and I ended up being the only two people who said no. And everybody else said yes. And my fear is that at some point down the road, whether the next legislature or the one after that, somebody's going to say, what have we done? Right? So this is the seriousness of the questions that are before us. And sometimes it's so difficult explaining these things to people who are not in any way at all paying attention. It is such a difficult job. And sometimes the people who you think are paying attention are not paying attention at all. At all. I've had colleagues from the university ask me basic questions, and I will go, have you ever looked at a legislative session, a dedicated channel, a live stream, a dedicated website? Have you ever looked to see what bills anybody has sponsored? And they will say no.